Kirby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is the weekend edition, and we are so grateful that you can join us. And as you might imagine, especially on a Friday, we are going to cover a lot of different topics, so stay with us. And if you would like to ask a question or make a comment, we certainly do welcome your phone calls. We have in studio with us today Lathan Watts, Director of Public Affairs for First Liberty. As a matter of fact, we're going to be talking about a couple of these valedictorian speeches that were controversial only because they wanted to mention God or Jesus Christ, and may even get into this one valedictorian speech where the student at Lake Highlands decided to throw away the prepared text and go on a rant about abortion, something I know about because two of my kids graduated from Lake Highlands High School. I did a baccalaureate at Lake Highlands High School graduation, so I know a little bit about some of that. And also I've got in front of me here, literally hot off the press, I got my oven mitt gloves on right now, the court-packing zombie apocalypse of constitutional government, and it is written by our good friend here, Lathan Watts. And so he'll be with us for the 2 hours, but I might just, as a program note, mention about a half an hour, we're going to have Gary Bauer with us as well, who is the president of American Values, and we'll be talking about what's happening in the Middle East and anti-Semitism and a number of issues. So, Lathan, it's always great to have you here.
Yeah, thanks for having me back.
We'll talk about valedictorians in just a minute, but whenever we get a jobs report, I always like to mention it just briefly. And we remember last month, the job report said they had all of 266,000 jobs created when they were expecting 1 million. They've now revised that up a little bit, so they said basically in April maybe 278,000 jobs, but still not very many. This one report now suggests 559,000 jobs, so that's a little better. They were still expecting 650,000 jobs, but that one's at least closer to the target. And I think we can come up with a lot of explanations, but I am a simple man, Lathan, and I think the simple answer is when you pay people not to work, guess what? They don't go and look for work.
Imagine that, right? I mean, who'd have thunk it?
Yeah.
What blows my mind about these jobs reports every time they come out is how the experts' expectations were wrong.
Yes.
Every time.
Yeah.
Like these guys,
they should go into being weathlercasters.
I was just about to say they're the economic equivalent of what TV weathermen. You just have to guess.
Yeah. Darts on a dartboard, just as easy as anything else.
Exactly. We were thinking it'd be 600,000 and it's less, or we were thinking it was going to be 1 million and it's 200,000.
And you're not even in the right order of magnitude sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. It's like saying, well, there's a 50% chance of rain. Well, okay, flip a coin. Like, yes or no?
Yes or no. Anyway, we were going, and again, those of you that are actually in the serious business of meteorology, we recognize how difficult that is. I did take graduate courses in meteorology. I finally gave up on that because they started getting into integral calculus. And I said, I'm done.
Hey,
but
nevertheless, you found a way to get paid for guessing.
Yes, and so that is the case. Anyway, we do want to talk about these valedictorian speeches. And if you'd like to know about that, on our website, we have both the story of Elizabeth Turner and Savannah Leffler. And the reason we do that, number one, is to see that First Liberty wins just about every one of these cases, sometimes without even having to go to court, simply by filing a case or by even sending a letter. But more importantly, I recognize that for many of you, your kids or grandkids haven't graduated yet, and somebody else is going to run into some of these difficulties. And so now you have the link to First Liberty, because this, as sure as sun rises in the east, you know there are going to be controversies about a valedictorian speech that horror talks about God or Jesus Christ. Tell us more.
Yeah, it's 'tis the season, as we say around the office.
Yes.
At First Liberty, it's like, well, it's graduation season. Just get ready.
Yes.
Because it does happen every year somewhere. And thankfully, these two cases, they both happen to be in Michigan. Thankfully, they
I noticed that both in Michigan. What is that about?
I don't know what's going on in Michigan.
Our listeners in Michigan say, "Oh, we expect that."
Yeah. Thankfully, they got in contact with us in time for us to help, and they were both vindicated and allowed to give the speech they wanted to give. And you're right, we do win these matters when we engage on them because the law is on the student's side.
Of course.
And a lot of times it is simply maybe a well-intentioned but misinformed principal or superintendent. Sometimes they might actually have an agenda. It doesn't really matter. The law is set on this issue, and that is the misunderstanding sometimes by the school district is that, well, this event, this graduation ceremony, is put on by the school, and we're a public school, and therefore, if we allow some sort of religious speech that is a government/school district, engaged in religious speech, and we're worried about violating the Establishment Clause, that could not be more wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and I understand where the idea comes from, because it's pervasive out there. But what the law says is that speech is the speech of the student.
Right.
It is his or her speech. They're not speaking on behalf of the school district, so it's not government speaking, and it is not government somehow proclaiming a religious message or giving some sort of tacit endorsement to one religion or another. The speech is the students, and they do have a First Amendment right to mention their faith if they choose to, whatever that faith may be. These two cases both happen to be Christians, but we would take the exact same action if it was a Jewish student who wanted to mention his or her faith, or a Muslim or a Buddhist or whoever.
Sure.
Because the First Amendment protects that. So in both of these cases, we were able to, merely by sending a letter and sort of educating the school district as, no, actually, this is completely permissible. And in fact, if you try to censor the speech, you're violating the First Amendment, not the Establishment Clause. You're violating, this person's free exercise rights and their free speech rights, and so on and so forth. So thankfully, they both did the right thing. We applaud them for doing the right thing. If this, if your son or daughter or granddaughter is a valedictorian and hasn't given their speech yet, you need to know, contact us at firstliberty.org if you're running into this, and we can help.
Might just mention, and I won't spend a lot of time on it, right down the road from us here at Lake Highlands High School. This one was held outdoor, but I've been to some of those indoors as well. And this prepared speech, which was supposed to be by the valedictorian about the influence of the media, in particular television, on young minds, was tossed aside, and she decided on a whim, although I suspect she had enough time to prepare her thoughts. And it just goes into this diatribe about abortion and reacting to the fact that in the state of Texas, they have also, as we have in many other states, passed what is called a heartbeat bill, which would say that after you can detect a heartbeat, you no longer can have an abortion. Those, of course, are always challenged in the court. She was absolutely convinced that this is going to ruin her life. And first of all, she says, I won't have any choice. And I'm thinking, well, first of all, you have a choice to get pregnant or not get pregnant, first of all. Second of all, you probably don't even understand the fact that this law, like every other one, will be declared unconstitutional. And so if you're really concerned about the future of abortion in this country, you should be looking to the Supreme Court, which will be considering it this fall. But nevertheless, I'm not blaming her. I think Matt Walsh had a good line the other day. He says, look, I'm more concerned about the parents and everybody around her. And also just the fact that I would be critical, even if it was a kid that was going to give a speech and then tossed it and then gave a pro-life message. I mean,
Absolutely.
In some respects, it's this deception part, which I think people should say, wait a minute, you promised to do one thing and then you did something else. And, that's of a concern as well. So anyway, just thought I would mention that 'tis the season of valedictorian speeches. And amazing how, if you talk about God, that can be controversial. If you're talking about abortion, you end up on the mainstream media today. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Conspiracy theories exist because they create meaning, reduce complexity and uncertainty, and emphasize human agency. That is one of the insights in the book, The Nature of Conspiracy Theories, that was written in German and has been translated into English. Earlier this week, I talked about some of the clues we can use to evaluate news narratives. Although this is an academic book, the author does provide some clues we can use to evaluate conspiracy theories. Although conspiracy theories have existed for millennia, Karl Popper first developed the idea of the conspiracy theory of society. Here are just a few clues to distinguish between a conspiracy theory and a real conspiracy. It turns out that real conspiracies are generally the work of a small group of people, whereas conspiracy theories construct scenarios in which at least dozens, and usually far more, people have been involved. Consider the conspiracy theory that the moon landing was a fake. Think of all the people astronauts, NASA personnel, scientists would all have to conspire to pull off such a hoax. Time frame is another important clue, since the overwhelming majority of proven conspiracies are relatively short-term projects with a concrete objective such as an assassination or a coup. By contrast, conspiracy theories nearly always posit a much larger time frame of conspiratorial action associated with far more ambitious but at the same time vaguer objectives. Sometimes these scenarios involve several generations of conspirators. These are just two of a number of clues that can help you distinguish between reality and the latest conspiracy. Discernment is a key because of the number of conspiracy theories proliferating on the internet. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kirby's booklet, A Biblical View on Loneliness, go to viewpoints.info/loneliness. That's viewpoints.info/loneliness.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, weekend edition. If you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Lathan Watson studio, and in about 15 minutes, we're going to be talking with our good friend Gary Bauer. Will be with us till the top of the hour, from the bottom of the hour to the top of the hour. And of course, we never cover enough with him, but we have Lathan in the next hour as well to get into all sorts of other topics, including one I want to get to in just a minute, and that is court packing, zombie apocalypse of constitutional government. You wrote that, just got it, and again, kudos to the people that do this. A matter in particular, Karen, who does the social media, she's actually posted it. So it's the last article. So that happened instantaneously. So if you find yourself saying, I'd like to read that, it is up there. But just before we finish with the issue of these valedictorian speeches, you've suggested before there may be some things we could do, and that is if you just got this very concerned and nervous type of principal, headmaster, superintendent, they could put in the program a disclaimer, couldn't they?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really simple fix. I mean, it's a one-line disclaimer on the graduation program that everybody gets, and you just state on there, look, all of the speakers' remarks reflect their opinions and not necessarily those of the district.
Yeah, that works.
Bingo.
Yeah.
Done deal. Everybody goes home. Everything's okay. Right. You could even have whoever the MC of the ceremony get up and just say it at the beginning of the ceremony.
Sure.
We
have these disclaimers on the radio. These opinions do not necessarily represent the views of the radio station that's carrying this program, and we try to be careful. But obviously, sometimes we get into controversial issues, so that is the case. And again, I might even open up the phones to get any people's comments about this, because one of the things I've wondered is, does it really make any sense in terms of our tradition to let the valedictorian give some kind of speech? I can't think of too many that were very memorable, or even the commencement address. Now, again, this comes from a guy that I've done commencement address for everything from high school graduations, or actually homeschool graduations, all the way to a college graduation.
Yeah.
Okay? So I've done some commencement speeches, and most of them are pretty inoffensive, pretty vacuous, full of platitudes, not memorable. As a matter of fact, if you give one of those, when I was speaking to the college, I think I even acknowledged, I know why you're here. It is not to hear me.
Exactly.
So, I'm going to deliver this in 15 minutes or less, or your money back, just like delivering a pizza or something like that, because I just know you're probably not going to remember it. And for those of us that have gone out on YouTube to watch some of these commencement speeches over the years, I think the only people watching were those of us giving commencement speeches trying to get some ideas. There's a few that are memorable, and they usually are because either somebody's come through an incredibly hard time and they're sharing a great story of victory, or else they're just stand-up comedians, and it really makes you laugh. But I don't know. Here you have this young woman who decides she's going to trash her speech and talk about abortion. I saw one the other day where the student gets up there and just from one line after another is criticizing the administration and the parents and the teachers and the counselors. I'm going, I don't know. There's a sense in which I'm beginning to want to rethink some of the traditions of graduation. So if you have a comment about that, feel free to give us a call, because it is a place where I think it just gets abused. It's kind of like I've said before. Sometimes we need to rethink whether we want to always provide the national anthem at every sporting event, because it just gets used, abused. People are bored, all the rest. So I'll leave that to you. But let's get into court packing. And we now have a commission. It isn't that the president said, I'm going to pack the court and I'm going to add at least 4 more justices, but this formation of a commission, as you write about here, is the first step, isn't it?
It is. And, theoretically, they're supposed to study if there's a need for court reform.
I see.
But they held their first sort of public meeting, if you can call it that. It was via Zoom, and there were only about 3 or 4 people spoke, and they were all completely prepared remarks. They didn't really take much public comment, and it made it pretty clear that what's going to come out of this commission is going to be a recommendation for reform, and shockingly, it's probably going to be, I think we need to add justices to the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
So this is an idea that, it's so bad. The FDR proposed it in 1937, really at the height of his popularity.
Right.
Maybe at the time the most popular president in American history. I mean, he was
fair to say.
I mean, he had massive majorities in the House and Senate.
New Deal had been implemented.
New Deal
all
was,
that
was going, and that's what led to him proposing it. Was the Supreme Court struck down some of his New Deal ideas, and he didn't like that. And so he said, well, maybe I'll just put a few more justices on the court that see things my way. And the reaction from the American people, even to this wildly popular president, was visceral. And his own party, members of his own party, led the opposition to the idea.
They certainly did. Yeah,
and
the Democrats that led this.
Exactly, and the idea died, as it should. But like a bad zombie movie, it's not really dead, because here it is now, coming back. And even though he didn't succeed in packing the court, he did sort of succeed.
Intimidate him.
In intimidating the court.
Well said.
Because after he proposed that, even though he didn't do it, the court then started sort of rubber stamping all the New Deal stuff and approving it, not striking it down. So that might be the real intent behind this whole farce of a commission. It could be you have one party that controls the White House and both chambers of the legislature sort of sending a not so subtle message to the court that, we'll just put some people on there that'll see things our way.
Yes.
And unless you start seeing things our way. I don't think that's going over that well with this court. So far, you had Justice Ginsburg before she passed away, who criticized the idea. You had Justice Stephen Breyer, who has criticized the idea. And if you've watched the court this term, there have been a lot of 9-0 decisions. And I think it was Jonathan Turley had an article on Fox News mentioning that he sees that as sort of a court's response saying, look, we're unanimous on a lot of things. We're not that controversial it's a very short list, and we are united, unpacked, and this is unnecessary.
That is good.
And I think that is I'm not saying they would do a decision just to send a message to this president, but the fact that you're getting a lot of 9-0 decisions this term, I think that is a not so subtle response to the idea of court packing.
Hard to get 9 justices to agree on just about anything. And that is the case. Just before we take a break, let's talk about the fact that you have a couple of reasons why this is a bad idea. First of all, a violation of separation of powers. The point of no return, because if you do it, then guess who does it next time? Exactly. And pretty soon we have a court of 150 justices. Yeah. And then just the whole issue of the politicized judiciary and the fact that the court would really lose its stature, justified or unjustified, that they're the final arbiter and somewhat objective arbiter of the constitutionality of various legislation.
I mean, this would make the Supreme Court, the third separate and co-equal branch, basically a wholly owned subsidiary of the other two branches.
Right.
When one party controls the other two. And I also point out, like, if you think elections are contentious now, wait until the Bill of Rights is up for grabs every 2 to 4 years. Because if the party in power can just pack the court with justices to achieve their political agenda, then elections are going to get really, really nasty. But the judiciary is granted independence in the Constitution for a very important reason. They're not subject to elections, because in a country that has democracy, in its electoral process, not a pure democracy, a republic, but the founders were suspicious of democracy because a majority can always vote to take away the rights of a minority. And we give these federal judges at all levels life tenure, not subject to popular opinion, because we expect them, if we the people through the legislative process sort of express the will of the people in a way that contradicts the Constitution, the judges have the responsibility to say no.
Yes.
You cannot do that. Now, there's also a process, if we want it bad enough, to amend the Constitution to say, yes, we can. But that is a vitally important role of the judiciary, and it's the reason they are established as independent of the voting process, because it's their job sometimes to say, no, you can't do this. This conflicts with the Constitution. And as you said, even though all three branches were intended to have a role in guarding the Constitution and protecting the God-given rights protected there, the judiciary has over time become seen as the final arbiter. And you don't want a politicized judiciary.
No, you don't. We need to take a break, but let me just say that we have posted this article. It is the last one there, and I want to give you an assignment because if you think this idea of court packing is a bad idea, this is written with the style of Lathan Watts' zombie apocalypse. A bad idea just keeps rising from the grave, and it's 4 pages, and we've posted it there. It comes from Million Voices, but not many people probably have seen that, so this is an opportunity for you to put it on Twitter, Facebook, or get some people thinking about that, and so we have put it there for you to post, and we'll be back with Gary Bauer right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
You're listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kirby Anderson.
Weekend edition. In studio with us today is Lathan Watts, again, Director of Public Affairs for First Liberty. And now joining us by phone is Gary Bauer, President of American Values, served as the Domestic Policy Advisor for Ronald Reagan, also the Chairman of the Campaign for Working Families. And one of the things I've started to do when Gary joins with us is I pull out a couple of things that I thought were most interesting in his end-of-day report. I call them Gary Bauer's greatest hits. So we have one on the Middle East and Israel, rising anti-Semitism. Also have another one came out just a couple of days ago on Jew hatred on the rise. But Gary, first of all, I think I figured out why the press doesn't cover some of these stories. They just refuse to cover stories that start with the letter I. That would be immigration. We don't have a crisis in the border. Inflation. Oh, $6 trillion budget and printing money? No. They won't cover Israel. They won't cover Iran. So maybe you can help us out here because some of these I stories need to be covered by Gary Bauer.
Hey, I love that, Kirby. Apparently, they've got low IQ, I guess.
We're going to steal that for sure. Yeah. Lathan's doing a podcast right after this. It'll probably show up in his podcast. Yeah. So what about this? You know, 2 weeks ago, I think we had you on talking about Israel, and we recognize that, of course, the game is played this way. Now, I think we're up to 5,000 rockets that have been launched by Hamas towards Israel. Now, Hamas doesn't start with an I, but it's a proxy of Iran, of nothing else. And no comment hardly at all. But the minute Israel then intervenes, of course, then the world press comes after them. But in your column, you reminded us of all the things that Trump did in terms of cutting off funds to the Palestinian Authority, naming an ambassador to Israel, of course, moving the embassy, and on and on and on. And with the exception maybe of not moving the embassy back to Tel Aviv, everything that Donald Trump did actually has been reversed now by Joe Biden, right?
It's a great summary, Kirby. The president and Netanyahu, in addition to everything else, were two men that were on the same page. They were friends. They also understood the great struggle that is going on and the attack on Western civilization, on Judeo-Christian civilization. And, of course, Israel and the United States are the two pillars of that civilization. And so their instincts were the same. They worked together. The relationship was quite different, obviously, between Netanyahu and President Obama during those years. And I think we're already seeing that the Israeli government, with historical reminders of the very miracle that Israel exists at all in the modern world. And of course, you also mentioned, and this is a key point, Hamas and the Palestinian Authority in many ways are guilty of a major war crime. It is against international law to put weapons in the middle of civilian concentrations, to place weapons near schools or mosques or churches or in shopping areas, and then using the cover of civilians fire those weapons at a country like Israel. So when Israel responds, they are not committing a war crime in spite of a lot of stupid people screaming that what's happening is a war crime. Once the war crime of what Hamas has done and Islamic Jihad has done, once that war crime has happened, the victim has a great deal of leeway about how they will respond to that kind of danger to their own citizens.
Let me just also talk about, for a lot of our listeners, what can we do to support Israel? Certainly we pray for the peace of Jerusalem, Psalm 122, but I think they should support you at American Values. They should support a group that you've been involved with, Christians United for Israel. So people are sometimes looking for an action point or an action item. That would be the case. But I want to get on to some other topics, but before we do, you mentioned Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. What do you think is the future there? Because we're hearing some some ominous things coming about Israel and about his future there as well.
Well, it's been my pleasure to get to know the Prime Minister and have a number of dealings with him over the years. I know even better the man he sent to Washington to be the Israeli ambassador to the United States, who's Ambassador Ron Dermer. Ron is no longer the ambassador now, but he was for 4 or 5 years. And he has conceded that as of now, it looks like Benjamin Netanyahu will not be able to stay as prime minister. Israel's had 4 elections in 2 years because the country's narrowly divided in many ways. And it's interesting, Kirby, they've had 4 elections in 2 years, and the head of the Palestinian Authority is in the 12th year of his 4-year term because he never has an election once he got elected once. But it looks as of now that there will be a new government in Israel, but I don't think that new government will last long because it's made up of contradictory elements of Israeli society. The only thing the various groups that may form the new government have in common is that they want Netanyahu out. But when it gets down to the issues that they have to deal with in Israel, that's not enough to keep a new government together. So we could very well see another election in a few months. But whatever happens, it is absolutely clear that the only vibrant democracy in the region that believes in the consent of the governed and so forth is Israel, and its enemies are quite the opposite.
I think so. It's not the apartheid state that we keep hearing from AOC and some of the others, for sure. Well, I wanted to get into anti-Semitism. I'm holding up the book that we have on that, but one of the other articles is this rising anti-Semitism. In some respects, Gary, that's not new. What is new is, for the first time, let's give credit where credit is due, you're starting to hear some Democrats saying, what's being said by some of these leading Democrats is anti-Semitic, and Donna Brazile actually wrote about that the other day. But we have Jewish diners attacked in Los Angeles. We have the anti-Jewish ideas being promoted in most of the major cities. You're having down with the Jews, although they're using words I can't use on radio about Jewish people. And our friend Dennis Prager says, the fact that they're attacking Jewish people in this country over what's happened in Israel shows it doesn't have anything to do with land for peace or Hamas. It has everything to do with anti-Jewish sentiment. You would agree, I think.
Oh, that's exactly that is the central point here that people ought to focus on. If the Polish government does something in their foreign policy that we don't like, our response is not to go out and look for a Polish American and try to beat him up. That would make absolutely no sense. That would indicate that we have a real problem with Polish people, not a problem with Poland. And I think we're seeing here, just like we've seen so many times in Europe, that, unfortunately on both the radical right and increasingly on the mainstream left, there is a great deal of anti-Semitism, and it needs to be fought wherever it shows its ugly head. I'm disturbed by how long those attacks have gone on here in the United States. Synagogues were vandalized, all sorts of things, barely made the media. And of course, we're living at a time where if you look crossways at somebody and they can call it a hate crime, they'll call it a hate crime. And there will be major news about it. But for some reason, a lot of very important people, frankly, including the President of the United States and the Vice President of the United States, waited quite a long time before they found their voice to condemn the rampant anti-Semitism that we saw mostly in America's big cities. And Kirby, I think there's another point there that this was not anti-Semitism in rural Texas
it wasn't. Yeah.
Or Trump country or whatever. This was taking place in cities controlled from top to bottom by the Democrat Party. And often the mayors and the city councils of those cities said nothing about it either. So it's a very dangerous time for the United States. And I heard a Jewish woman do an interview in Los Angeles. I thought it was chilling. She said, for the first time in my life, I wondered whether I would have to take my children and leave America.
That's amazing. Need to take a break, and we have a lot more to cover with Gary Bauer. If you're looking for someone who has a voice for Israel and for pro-life, pro-family issues, that's Gary Bauer. We'll continue our conversation with him right after this.
I recently attended a breakfast sponsored by Alliance Defending Freedom. Attorney General William Barr was the speaker. The room was filled with prominent conservatives of a mind to turn the tide on the left's takeover of the federal government and culture. He could have talked about anything: politics, woke law enforcement, corporate bullying. He chose education. The former Attorney General said, and I quote, "We must confront the reality that it may no longer be fair, practical, or even constitutional to provide publicly funded education solely through the vehicle of state-operated schools." He explained that our public schools started as a religious project. The attempt to seal education off from religion is relatively new. For most of the history of public education, we've been able to finesse the issue, because the country has been relatively homogeneous. No longer. Horace Mann's Common School movement began in the 1830s with two missions: to forge a common identity and to foster the moral formation of our citizens. It was widely recognized that public schools needed religion, and they incorporated an anodyne form of Christianity. Bill Barr explained that after about 100 years, the left began secularizing public schools by subtraction. But teaching morality and character without the undergirding belief system left a vacuum. What we are now seeing is indoctrination into a radical secular belief system. Children are taught a new progressive orthodoxy, even that they might change their gender without the consent of their parents. Today, in our schools, people who speak in support of traditional religious doctrines are punished for engaging in hate speech. Instead of a melting pot, students are immersed in critical race theory, which separates Americans on account of identity and unbridgeable differences. Do we even need public schools? Bill Barr pointed out, public funding of education does not require that instruction must be delivered by means of government-run schools. The funds can follow the student. This is where we should direct our efforts. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Gary Bauer with us of American Values, and of course, Lathan Watts of First Liberty. And Lathan, just before I go back to Gary, you at First Liberty are probably dealing with and probably have filed more court cases about anti-Semitic laws, principles, sometimes zoning regulations than you've ever have at First Liberty.
Yeah, we really have seen a sharp increase in the number of cases we've had to engage in to protect particularly the Orthodox Jewish community. In New York, in California, in Texas, in Massachusetts, with some of the way the COVID restrictions were implemented, and then as they started to loosen them up, well, they were treating Orthodox Jewish synagogues differently than they were treating liquor store down the street.
New York,
we've had everything from a chicken rights group sue an Orthodox Jewish rabbi.
That's your most recent case, isn't it?
It's been going on. I think we've had to defend this poor man 5 or 6 times now because there's a ceremony called a Kippuros ceremony that he does on the eve of Yom Kippur, and they always manage to sue him right on the eve of Yom Kippur to try to stop it. So and like zoning regulations that you mentioned, like here in Dallas, we had an Orthodox Jewish rabbi
because they didn't have enough parking, and
Right.
Orthodox Jews
don't drive on the Sabbath. Yeah.
I mean, these are just unbelievable things that you've had to deal
so
with.
it really has. We've seen
And vandalism and attacks and all sorts of stuff.
increase in the last few years in our number of matters dealing with the Orthodox Jewish community.
So, Gary, it's not just your experience, and certainly I would encourage people to read, of course, your end-of-day report every day, but the one we have here gives just one example after another. And the thing I love about your end-of-day report is you have then links so that you can go and find the original articles. But whether it's the smearing of Israel as an apartheid state or the picking out just Israel or Jewish people for the particular issues, whether it is the boycott, disinvestment, or sanction, the BDS, which is developing on college campuses. This is a big issue which we as Christians should be concerned about.
Yeah, there's no question about it, Kirby. And, I have all kinds of theological reasons. You and Latham probably do too, about why, as a Christian, I support Israel. But even if you don't share our particular theological worldview, it ought to be fairly obvious in the dangerous world that we live in that countries like the United States and Israel that stand for the values of Western civilization have to stick together. It doesn't mean we're always going to be right or we won't have a difference of opinion, but certainly when you look at the threats that we're mutually facing, whether it's Iran or the nut-running Syria, radical Islam, the growth of, unfortunately, communism even after the fall of the Soviet Union, North Korea. There's plenty of reasons that free nations need to make common cause with each other. And every once in a while I'll run into people who will say, well, Gary, we need to take care of problems here. I totally agree. So why are we getting involved in doing all these things for Israel? And my response to that is, it's not a one-way street. We get a lot from Israel. They don't just get things from us. In fact, Israeli intelligence has told us more and given us more information about things happening in the Middle East, including the Iranian nuclear program, that sadly, our own intelligence agencies were unable to pick up. And even when we give military aid to Israel, usually there's a requirement in the legislation that they have to buy the military weapons with the aid we're giving them from U.S. defense companies.
Yes.
So it's a very positive relationship all the way around. I'm absolutely convinced that Israel and the United States are the only two nations. There are other good countries, but particularly the United States and Israel. If something happened to us, I have no doubt the world would sink into another dark age.
I have noticed a few times, if you look at the United Nations, that sometimes there's some votes where there's only two that vote in a particular way, the United States and Israel, and that should tell you something, too, about some of the complaints. But you said something in passing I wanted to pick up on, because I've got a commentary coming out next week. I want to make sure I'm not making a mistake here, but it was the fact that all of these protests have happened pretty much in blue cities, and you might say, why is that? And my argument is that when you look at these so-called pro-Palestinian demonstrators, I think they're doing it not so much to convince the red states as to try to keep the people in the blue states in line. And especially, Gary, when you see a couple of those people in those protests are LGBTQ, I don't think they're, flying the flag of Hamas. I think they're flying the flag of Democrats. It's kind of intersectionality. And so it's interesting that you don't see these riots, these protests in suburban areas or rural areas, possibly because there might be well-armed citizenry there. But I think part of the protests aren't so much to convince people is to keep everybody in line and say, we've got to continue fight against Israel. And that's kind of a puzzle for a lot of people watching some of those protests and those riots and those demonstrations.
Yeah, that's a great analysis, Kirby. For the LGBTQ people, I would invite any one of those individuals saying terrible things about Israel to get on a plane and fly to Gaza and stay there for a weekend and see how you feel about LGBTQ rights. There are none in Gaza. There are none in a good bit of the Islamic world. In fact, in a good bit of the Islamic world, including in Iran, if you were found engaging in homosexual conduct, that's the punishment is the death penalty. The Iranian government has been known to throw gays and lesbians off of rooftops to their death in order to make a point. So the fact that American progressives in the gay community or in the environmental community or in the women's rights community are standing with some of the most repressive Islamic regimes in the world against the only really democratic free nation of Israel is more than ironic. It's almost obscene. And it's self-destructive ultimately to the goals some of these groups claim that they speak for.
Well, we're just about out of time. Let me again encourage people to get your end-of-day report. Yesterday, you talked about Dr. Anthony Fauci's new book. Oh, boy, I'm really wanting to read that one. And some of these hacker attacks, which, again, we've talked about on this program, and a variety of other topics, as well as remembering the 32nd anniversary of Tiananmen Square, China, and all the rest. And so if you find yourself saying, I want to get some news I can trust, we, again, have a link to AmericanValues.org. You need to get the end-of-day report, and if you would like to get a sample, well, we've picked out a few of the best hits of Gary Bauer this week and posted them on our website at pointofview.net. So, Gary, appreciate you being with us today here on Point of View.
Well, thank you, Kirby. It's always great to be with you. Hope you have a blessed weekend, and your listeners too, and let's all keep fighting the good fight to preserve and protect this great country.
Again, Gary Bauer, and we have all that information available at our website. We do have quite a number of articles we've posted, the one by Lathan Watts, a couple of ones by Gary Bauer, and we've got a lot more to talk about. Never Let a Plague Go to Waste. That comes from our good friend Victor Davis Hanson. Coke Gets Canned. Well, I had to put that one in there. We have so many listeners in Georgia right now. We'll get into that. And before we end, we're going to talk about how one particular school district was able to get rid of critical race theory, and I think it provides a great model for what you can do in your school district and how they were successful and how you can be successful as well. So those are articles and resources that we have on our website, and we'll talk about those right after these important messages.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @Point of View RTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @Point of View RTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kirby Anderson.
Second hour today, if you'd like to join the conversation, we certainly do welcome your phone calls now, 1-800-351-1212. Lathan Watson studio with us, and we're going to get into a couple of the articles we posted. Never Let a Plague Go to Waste. That's a piece by Victor Davis Hanson. And then one that might seem obscure for just a minute, but it relates very much. Will Steven Pinker lose the bet of the century? But to introduce that, we'll come back to something I mentioned just a minute ago, and that is Dr. Anthony Fauci. By the way, the highest paid person in the federal government, paid more than the President of the United States, has a book coming out called Expect the Unexpected, 10 Lessons on Truth, Service, and the Way Forward. And that sort of rivals a book, I'm thinking, Lathan, where Governor Andrew Cuomo wrote a book called American Crisis, Leadership Lessons from COVID-19 Pandemic. And I'm not sure either of them should be writing books given all that we've been through. What are your thoughts?
Two paragons of self-awareness, Cuomo and Fauci. I mean, it takes a lot of audacity to write a book about how well you dealt with this crisis if you're either one of those two guys. I mean, the title of Fauci's book, I mean, when you start with Expect the Unexpected, really? Did you expect the unexpected? Because if you had, I think we'd have dealt with this a lot better.
A lot better. In these emails, well, you know, people see what they want to in these emails. Some think it just shows he's culpable. Others say, well, he just was trying to catch up. So whatever. But
yeah, he should have hired Hillary Clinton for server maintenance.
So that the emails would be hard to find.
Exactly.
I mean, it is amazing. And you've said before that one of the reasons why sometimes the leaders, and I'm not saying all Democrats, but the leaders in the Democratic Party are so successful is because of kind of the audacity. I mean, I think if I had been through this as the governor of New York and I had such a crisis in the nursing homes, the last thing that would come to mind is, I need to write a book about my leadership, given the fact that I am probably directly responsible for the deaths of so many individuals that we've talked about on this program.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to spend the next few years dodging wrongful death claims because of your leadership in New York, maybe not the best time to write a book about how great your leadership is in New York.
Well, anyway, we're talking about the pandemic, and I thought it would be good for just a minute as our second article that you can see on the Never Let a Plague Go to Waste. And Victor Davis Hanson's been on the program many times with us before with the Hoover Institute there in Stanford, one of the great beneficiaries of good classical education, and we're the beneficiaries of his wisdom. I'm just going to pick a few points here and get Lathan's comments. First of all, he was very concerned about the fact that what we have with many of those leaders, they picked and chose which businesses could stay open without much rationale. They sent the infected into rest homes occupied by the weak and the vulnerable. We just talked about that. But Lathan, come back to that, because it isn't just that they were picking and choosing businesses that could or could not stay open. These are essentials, not essential, almost to a person, man or woman, governor, both mostly in the Democratic states, but not exclusively, decided we're also going to shut down every church and every religious organization around.
Yeah, absolutely. In a total violation of the First Amendment, the government's responsibility towards religion is to remain neutral, not to treat it different than a similarly situated secular organization. And that's exactly what these governors did. Like, let's open up the casinos. But no, churches, we Can't open up churches. Or, casinos can be opened at 50% capacity, but churches can only have 50 people. VDH is a national treasure, by the way. You should read everything that man writes. I've been privileged to spend some time with him via National Review and a role that I played there a little bit. And he is spot on this article.
He certainly is.
The pandemic, I think, revealed the totalitarian impulses of a lot of people in government. It was always there, and this just provided the opportunity for them to exercise it.
The title comes from, of course, you may remember that Rahm Emanuel, who was Clinton's, or at least Obama's chief of staff, but also, of course, worked with the Clintons as well, and Hillary Clinton, and that was, she said it, but he was known to have said, never let a serious crisis go to waste. And even after the 2008 economic downturn and meltdown, Barack Obama also wanted to fundamentally transform the country. And so we're going to spend some more time in the next couple of weeks talking about this. I've got a speech I'm giving on Tuesday to a group about what is called the Great Reset. And that's another place where, once again, I'm going to talk a little bit about media bias, but you have this World Economic Forum, which is pretty much the Davos crowd. If you go to Davos, Switzerland, we're talking about the elites that think they know better than you and me how to run not only their countries but the world.
The ones that fly on their private jets to go talk about climate change.
And I love the way Victor Davis Hanson talks about them. They're the Platonic guardians. Remember those from, of course, if you ever had to read The Republic, you know what I'm talking about there. But this Great Reset is, let's use this crisis to completely restructure America. And there are a lot of people looking at it from a different angle, the fourth turning, the fact that we have a variety of issues with the economy, with society, with politics, with technology. They're really wanting to make the future government, and this is back to globalism and everything else, in their own image. And so I just wanted you to see, I think, a very good kind of 4-page summary from a man who, although he's read the classics and is brilliant, still has a pretty good ability to communicate to just the average you and me folks out there. And it's just a warning that because we've been through this, they are convinced, that is, some of our betters, they think they're better than us, are actually going to use this Great Reset to completely restructure this country and the world.
Yeah, VDH sort of wears his genius lightly. He's very readable, even though he is incredibly brilliant and educated and well researched on everything that he writes about. And this article is a really good example of that.
Let me just mention before we take a break, and then we'll come back and get into it a little bit more. You might say, okay, what's this Steven Pinker losing the bet of the century? And a while back, I did a commentary about Steven Pinker because when he had the book come out years ago, The Better Angels of Our Nature, he predicted that things were getting better and better. And so in his book in 2018, Enlightenment Now, which I have sitting on my shelf, even though he's a humanist and an atheist, he says a lot of really good things in there. By the way, most of what he says are positives. I think came about not just because of the Enlightenment, because of the Reformation, because of Christians and a variety of others, but we'll give him credit. But he traveled around making the statement that the world is getting better and better. And so he then entered into a number of bets. And one of those is a bet that would be paid of, it's all of $400, but bioterror or bioerror will lead to 1 million casualties in a single event within a 6-month period starting no later than December 31st, 2020. Now, whether or not that bet gets paid determines whether or not this was an accident or whether it was a bioerror, although some people are even arguing it's a bioterror. So I want to come back just for a few minutes and come up to the fact that this bet brings us back to, where did this virus come from? Did it come from the wet markets? Did it come from somebody eating a pangolin or a bat? Or did it come from the Wuhan Institute of Virology? Because at least $400 and someone's reputation is on the line. We'll talk about that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Conspiracy theories exist because they create meaning, reduce complexity and uncertainty, and emphasize human agency. That is one of the insights in the book, The Nature of Conspiracy Theories, that was written in German and has been translated into English. Earlier this week, I talked about some of the clues we can use to evaluate news narratives. Although this is an academic book, the author does provide some clues we can use to evaluate conspiracy theories. Although conspiracy theories have existed for millennia, Karl Popper first developed the idea of the conspiracy theory of society. Here are just a few clues to distinguish between a conspiracy theory and a real conspiracy. It turns out that real conspiracies are generally the work of a small group of people, whereas conspiracy theories construct scenarios in which at least dozens, and usually far more, people have been involved. Consider the conspiracy theory that the moon landing was a fake. Think of all the people, astronauts, NASA personnel, scientists that would all have to conspire to pull off such a hoax. Time frame is another important clue, since the overwhelming majority of proven conspiracies are relatively short-term projects with a concrete objective such as an assassination or a coup. By contrast, conspiracy theories nearly always posit a much larger time frame of conspiratorial action associated with far more ambitious but at the same time vaguer objectives. Sometimes these scenarios involve several generations of conspirators. These are just two of a number of clues that can help you distinguish between reality and the latest conspiracy theory. Discernment is a key because of the number of conspiracy theories proliferating on the internet. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kirby's booklet, A Biblical View on Loneliness, go to viewpoints.info/loneliness. That's viewpoints.info/loneliness.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. If you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. And our third article, again, is more of a little bit of a footnote, but it's a good way to get the conversation started because Steven Pinker, who was traveling all over the United States after his book came out on Enlightenment Now, argued that violence is decreasing and all sorts of other things, and that we're living in a better and better world. And Lathan, first of all, I'm not telling you as a historian anything you don't already know, but for our audience, until World War I, this kind of optimistic humanism existed. There was this belief that technology, the Industrial Revolution, the fact that these nation states are maybe now going to cooperate a little bit more, was this idea that we were headed towards maybe a utopia in the 20th century. And the first thing that kind of was a nail on the coffin of that was World War I. And then the final nails and coffin lid was World War II. But I'm starting to see once again this idea from our humanist friends that, I think we are really headed for a utopia because we have seen an advancement in technology. We haven't seen any major wars yet. We've had some terrorism and things like that. And so one of his bets was a bioterror or bioerror will lead to 1 million casualties in a single event within a 6-month period starting no later than December 31st, 2020. And as Russ Duthat points out, the bet can only be resolved when we answer the question, was COVID-19 an escapee from the Wuhan Institute of Virology, or did it jump from a bat cave to its first human patient, or from a wet market? And so in some respects, that whole optimism is at really being addressed. But more importantly, it also brings us back to this ongoing question, where did this virus actually come from?
Yeah, And it's an incredibly important question, particularly, I mean, once you settle the issue of was it, animal to human transmittal, like you said, was it a bat? Was somebody ate some bad bat soup or whatever in a Chinese wet market? Or did it come from this lab where they were studying these viruses? Now, if you answer that question, the next question has to be, if it came from the lab, did it come from the lab by accident or on purpose? And that's a much, much more serious question. Because if you can determine that it did come from that lab, there is just a huge difference in whether or not it happened by mistake or was it done intentionally. I don't know. If I was having to make a bet like this guy did, I would probably bet on that it was accidental.
Probably.
But that their response or their attempt to cover it up and not let the rest of the world know that it had gotten out, that would be intentional. And I think if you know this is getting out in your country, you're the Chinese Communist Party, maybe you just don't want to be the only one on this sinking ship, and so you sick it on the rest of the world by not telling them that it happened. And not giving them time to keep it from coming to other countries.
Well, and Dr. Anthony Fauci was asked about that the other day, and his argument was, well, if they know how dangerous it was, why would they allow that to be unleashed on their own countrymen? And I was thinking that statement happened when we were just talking about the 32nd anniversary of Tiananmen Square massacre, which unfortunately, since Anthony Fauci probably doesn't remember that, and since our younger audience, since it happened 32 years ago, don't even know what we're talking about, this is where China had no hesitation whatsoever to bring tanks in and army in to kill its own citizens, declared martial law, and pretty much just eradicated any of those Chinese students that were actually calling for liberty and freedom. And so to say that, I just don't think the Chinese government would do this to their own citizens, I'm thinking, do you not understand the history of communist China?
Exactly, or just history in general. I mean, it's not just communist China, it's every totalitarian regime that is based on left-wing Marxist ideology. An atheistic Marxist leftist government, they have no value of the individual. They have no concept of individual liberty or the imago Dei that each of us is made in the image of God and therefore has value and must be protected. That they view humanity as servants of the state, and if they have to kill a couple million of you, well, then so be it. I mean, that's what Stalin did in Russia. It's the Chinese have done it there. The Kim dynasty in North Korea has done it. Every totalitarian left-wing regime in history has done this to their own people.
Yes.
Because they have no value on human life.
Well, again, and that is not saying that we're against Chinese people. We are sad for so many people that live in China that have to endure the Communist Party there in China. But just before we take a break, I thought you may have found yourself in a discussion with some people, and they're saying, well, do we know whether the virus came from the Wuhan Institute of Virology? And I wanted to maybe give you some, if you will, talking points or maybe some things to think about. So if you got something to write with, you can number 1 to 3. I'm going to give you 3 arguments. And the first one actually will be easy to find because it's my Monday commentary, in which we point out, as we did a couple of weeks ago, that Nicholas Wade, you might say again, who's he? Well, he was the former science editor for 4 decades at New York Times, wrote a book, an article first, called Origin of COVID. And he and a variety of other individuals were starting to say, we're just not so convinced that this did not come from the lab. And so one of the arguments I use in the Monday commentary, I've mentioned it before, but it's worth mentioning again. This is a biological argument because according to the MIT Technology Review, the people in China working with the World Health Organization have tested 50,000 animal specimens, including 1,100 bats from the province where Wuhan is located. And they haven't found any virus that looks anything like what is killing and has killed millions of people. So you could say the absence of evidence is not the evidence of absence, but it's pretty close because they haven't found that virus. Well, the other day I pointed out 2 others. So number 1 is 50,000 species, can't find it. Number two, it turns out that a couple of professors, one in Britain and one in Norway, looked at the actual genome, and they noticed something very interesting, and that is the genome has 4 positively charged amino acids in a row. Okay, I've taken organic chemistry. Organic chemistry 101. You don't get 4 positively charged amino acids together. There are all sorts of reasons why that doesn't work, and the only way you would get that is if it was artificially manufactured. And that was what tipped off people like Dr. David Baltimore. He was a man that won the Nobel Prize at the age of 37. He was in and out of the laboratory where my wife worked when we were at Yale, and so we've kind of followed his career, and he says, this doesn't look like that as well. So there's, reason number 2. And then finally, reason number 3, and then we'll get off science, because some people said, I hate science. I didn't know I was going to have a biology class today when I'm listening to Point of View. But one of the other things the scientists pointed out is that if you are talking about a natural virus and a pandemic, it does mutate. We've been talking about these different strains. It turns out that over time, it usually mutates to become more infectious but less pathogenic. In other words, more easy to catch, but less lethal. It's done really just the opposite. A good example, I used that the other day, is a polio virus. It's pretty easy to catch the polio virus. Of course, now nobody catches it because we pretty much eliminated it. But those that got it, then it was very difficult. But Ebola is probably the best example because it's relatively difficult to get Ebola. But if you do, you're dead. And matter of fact, in our other studio, we actually did an interview with Dr. Kent Brantley. Remember him? He was with Samaritan's Purse in Liberia. He got it. He would have died if it weren't for the fact that we flew him here and found some ways to save his life and a few others. So that is a 1, 2, 3 punch that tells me that it's just hard to think it came from the wet market.
Yeah, I don't know how you argue that. I mean,
unless you just don't want to ignore science,
Right.
We'll play believe the science. Let's believe the science.
Exactly right. The party of science will find a way to to disagree with you. But yeah, I mean, it has all the signs of something that was created in a lab.
One other point I might just mention, why didn't the scientists speak out? And I'm going to quote from Vanity Fair. Okay, this is the first. Maybe the first time I've ever quoted Vanity Fair on Point of View.
You're broadening your horizons here, Kirby.
A months-long investigation with about 40 people, and they basically concluded that some of these scientists that might have spoken out were warned. Some of them got death threats. Some of them were told that you would pull their funding. And so in some respects, it was maybe intimidation that kept more than just a few. And there have always been a few that have always, from the moment, have said they think it came from the lab. But like I've said before, where does Senator Tom Cotton go to get his reputation back after he has been seen as a conspiracy theorist and all that? By the way, my argument today is there are ways to determine whether or not there's a conspiracy theory, and I've posted those on our Viewpoints website. When we come back, though, we'll have a little bit of fun. Cope gets canned, and a couple other key issues we'll talk about right after these important messages.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kirby Anderson.
Final half hour, we'd like to join a conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Lathan Watts with us, and I thought these last couple of articles here, Coke gets canned. We're going to talk about Coca-Cola for just a minute, and then in Southlake, how Southlake, Texas won its battle against critical race theory. Now, Coca-Cola, in a couple of cases, has really been about as woke as it can be. We've said before, get woke, go broke, and I don't think Coke's going to go broke anytime soon, but first of all, you had all the way back a couple of months ago when Coca-Cola decided that they were going to use a training course called Confronting Racism with Robin DiAngelo. Okay, the website there starts with these premises, and I'll see, Lathan, if any of those are ones you agree with or disagree with. Racism is the foundation of Western society. We're socialized under a racist hierarchy. All of us are shaped by the forces of racism. No one is exempt. All white people benefit from racial hierarchy regardless of their intentions. No one. I think you can see where we're going on this. The racial hierarchy is invisible and take it for granted, and it just goes on, and you can watch the video because they give you some links. And so if you want to look at the website or if you want to see the video course, you can, and all the rest. And so that was enough to get people saying, should Coca-Cola be trying to teach everybody in their company to be less white? And then, now we go to Georgia, because you have then the decision by Coca-Cola to then mix the suds up a little bit more. And this election reform bill was enough for them to criticize it. Later, Coke came back and maybe had some conciliatory statements, but that was just a little too much for Surrey County in North Carolina. And I suspect maybe also some other places in Georgia. Anyway, the commissioners there just finally decided to ban all Coca-Cola vending machines from the county buildings. Now, again, I'm not calling for anybody to ban anything, but if you want to make a decision about you're going to buy Pepsi instead of Coke or whatever, that's the case. But nevertheless, the county commissioner, Eddie Harris, and by the way, if you wonder where Surrey County is up, it's kind of northwest of Winston-Salem there in North Carolina. There may be some other counties that are doing this. This is just one I'm reading from right now. He wrote, recently you as CEO of Coca-Cola Corporation released a statement speaking against the Georgia bill that resulted in the chaos that transpired during the 2020 election. Specifically, the bill expanded early voting opportunities, provided changes to ensure shorter voting lines, ensure that drop boxes are secure, allows greater access to fast, secure, and transparent elections. Your company's position on this is wrong on many levels. Many Americans believe the last election was not held in a fair manner, and we will continue to watch this, and we hope and concur that future elections are not more closely monitored or regulated. And so they basically referred to the electoral process last time as somewhat of a mess. So whether it's critical race theory or criticizing the attempt at election reform, a lot of people saying we're not going to buy Coca-Cola, and commissioners in this particular county said we're not even going to put those vending machines in the county.
Yeah, I think that article that you're talking about in the training that Coke was putting in there also gave them suggestions on how to be less white. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if it's got that list in there, but you should read
be less oppressive, be less arrogant, be less certain, be less defensive, be less ignorant, be less humble, listen, believe, break with apathy, break with solidarity. There's just a couple.
Right. A lot
be
of
less
people,
certain. We don't want certainty here.
A lot of people heard about what Coke was doing and added one more thing you could do to be less white, and that was drink less Coke.
So, if nothing else, I'd love to get some of your thoughts about this, because this whole issue of critical race theory has come to a head. And even those of you that are Southern Baptist, I might just mention the Southern Baptists are going to be convening. And there is a Resolution 9, which you can check out, which is actually going to be an attempt to say that in the past where they said critical race theory could be used as a proper biblical interpretation, now you had so many messengers to this particular conference that are saying we want to withhold that and withdraw that and actually counter that particular idea. So in some respects, just before we run out of time, Lathan, I posted this very lengthy article, how South Lake, Texas won its battle against critical race theory. I do it because some of you might be dealing with the same issue in your community. There's some that have had this sort of wrong-ended idea that we can pass a law banning critical race theory. Well, that doesn't work very well, especially not at the university level, but there are ways that you can bring about some change. And one of the principals in this article is Tim O'Hare, who's actually sat in the very chair you sat right now. And that is, the word began to be spread that in this particular county and this particular location, you had an attempt to pass cultural competence. And really what it was a redefinition of critical race theory. And they tried to pass it in July when not many people were paying attention. But there were a few people. One of those is the man who we've had on the program here, Tim O'Hare, who actually at that time, I think he'd run for mayor, but he was that time, I think, a former chairman of the Tarrant County Republican Party. And he worked with another individual, Lee Wambangus, I think is how the name is pronounced. And if nothing else, they started looking through this and recognizing that one of the best ways to deal with this is start identifying who is running for the school board, and instead of deal with it maybe just at the school level, deal with it at the school board level. And that is certainly the case. And they really brought a lot of pressure there, because this is not a place where you would think that critical race theory would be implemented. But the point is that since the Carroll Independent School District is one of the best in the state, they said, if they can pass it in Southlake, they can pass it anywhere. So they recognized that the battle was sort of drawn. And so they began to then look at this. And the good news is that there was a 34-page cultural competence action plan. And it was to be anti-racist. We heard this before. Of course you have, because those ideas have been espoused by all sorts of individuals like Ibram X. Kendi. And the people that had done this recognized that they needed to very quickly pull that off of the server, because lots of times it all of a sudden just magically disappears. They're working with some of the same people that work with Hillary Clinton's server.
I think so, yeah.
And so fortunately, because they had that, they could pass it around, and then started a petition, and it didn't take long. They had 1,200 people who started a petition. They started a PAC called the South Lake Families PAC, did this for fundraising, legal work, and political organizing. And as they said, the best ammunition was the plan itself, which they made a real point of downloading the document, passing it around, letting everybody read it. And so all of a sudden then, when it came time to actually have a school board meeting, all these people showed up. And it was very obvious that the school board members were not prepared for that. So the best they could come up with is the plan. They decided to receive the plan and not approve it. And that's when it began to be a little bit more obvious that they were going to have to do a little bit more. So they put together a rally. And the person that spoke to that was our friend Colonel Allen West, who is up until yesterday, I guess, the chairman of the Texas Republican Party.
Yep.
He's stepping down. We'll see what happens there. They raised enough money. They began to put together various individuals to run. And here was another key. They recognized that it would be really dangerous if you had too many conservatives run against each other, because you would split the vote. So what they did is they said, we're going to vet these individuals and get a guarantee that after we select the person that we want to run, the rest of you won't run. Because oftentimes, you know what happens. You have 3 or 4 really good people run. They all split the vote, and the least likely and the least acceptable person gets in. So they actually had a vetting of the candidates, 2 hours each, 45 minutes to an hour, to sometimes more with each one. And so as a result, they took the time to get 2 more individuals in there. And very quickly, they were beginning to put up all sorts of yard signs. And in an election, You know as well as I do, a school board election, if you get a 10% turnout, you're lucky. But this one turned out almost a record for turnout because people began to realize indeed what was at stake. I wanted to give you this because it goes on for approximately 12 pages, but it is a perfect manual for what you can do in your community if you start hearing words about teaching some kind of offensive sex education, or they're going to show pornography, or they're going to talk about critical race theory, or whatever it might be. This is just a perfect, if you will, blueprint on how to make a difference and be salt and light in your community.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is the only way it gets done. If you're relying on policymakers at a district, county, state, federal level to fix this for you, you are setting yourself up for disappointment. These people found out what was going on and decided to fix it themselves, and they did. And you're going to have to be in all of your school districts paying really, really close attention because, like they said, the fact that the plan got out there was the reason that they were able to defeat it. Other school districts that want to do this are not going to put the plan out there.
I would think so. So again, we give that to you as a manual or a template. We'll be back right after this.
I recently attended a breakfast sponsored by Alliance Defending Freedom. Attorney General William Barr was the speaker. The room was filled with prominent conservatives of a mind to turn the tide on the left's takeover of the federal government and culture. He could have talked about anything: politics, woke law enforcement, corporate bullying. He chose education. The former Attorney General said, and I quote, "We must confront the reality that it may no longer be fair, practical, or even constitutional to provide publicly funded education solely through the vehicle of state-operated schools." He explained that our public schools started as a religious project. The attempt to seal education off from religion is relatively new. For most of the history of public education, we've been able to finesse the issue, because the country has been relatively homogeneous. No longer. Horace Mann's Common School movement began in the 1830s with two missions: to forge a common identity and to foster the moral formation of our citizens. It was widely recognized that public schools needed religion, and they incorporated an anodyne form of Christianity. Bill Barr explained that after about 100 years, the left began secularizing public schools by subtraction. But teaching morality and character without the undergirding belief system left a vacuum. What we are now seeing is indoctrination into a radical secular belief system. Children are taught a new progressive orthodoxy, even that they might change their gender without the consent of their parents. Today, in our schools, people who speak in support of traditional religious doctrines are punished for engaging in hate speech. Instead of a melting pot, students are immersed in critical race theory, which separates Americans on account of identity and unbridgeable differences. Do we even need public schools? Bill Barr pointed out, public funding of education does not require that instruction must be delivered by means of government-run schools. The funds can follow the student. This is where we should direct our efforts. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, let me just mention that during this particular time, we oftentimes play the commentary by Penna Dexter, and it was interesting because she talks about being at a breakfast sponsored by Alliance Defending Freedom, and they had the former Attorney General William Barr. So you would have figured he'd be talking about law No, he talked about education, in which he was actually saying that we must confront the reality that we may no longer be having fair, practical, even constitutionally provide publicly funded education solely through the vehicle of state-operated schools, and then takes us back to the history of the public education system, going back to Horace Mann and some of those individuals who were humanist and atheist, who actually had the idea to forge a common identity and to foster the moral formation of our citizens. But the former Attorney General Bill Barr said that basically what has happened is the left has been successful in the schools by subtraction. That is, they have in some respects been teaching morality and character without the undergirding belief system, which I remember he talked about when he spoke at Notre Dame. And if nothing else, we're now seeing what he calls indoctrination. So if you'd like to read Penedexter's commentary, we always post it. It is up there today on our website. And of course, if you sign up, you receive mine Monday through Friday and hers on Saturday. My commentary today, by the way, is on conspiracies. And we'll maybe talk a little bit more about that next week, because earlier in the week I talked about, Lathan, how some individuals have said how you can determine when you've got a news narrative that's inaccurate. I also, in this one, talk about from this new book that came out, The Nature of Conspiracy Theories, how you can distinguish between a real conspiracy and all these false conspiracy theories. So if nothing else, there are some great resources at our website, pointofview.net. But here, I think it's interesting. The Attorney General, Bill Barr, he didn't talk about law. He recognized if we don't turn the public school system around, those are the individuals that eventually will be our lawyers and justices and jurists, and that's not good for the future of this country.
No, and if you go back, if you look at what the founders understood to be the purpose of education, there's no, in the Constitution, amongst the enumerated powers of the federal government, you will not find public education anywhere in there. So really, the federal government should have no role in public education. Mm-hmm. If you go back to when they passed the Northwest Ordinance, one of the very first acts of Congress, they were settling what was then the Northwest Territory, which is now the states of Ohio and Indiana and other places. There's a section in there, and I'm going to try to quote it. It's probably a paraphrase, but it says that religion and morality being necessary for good government and the happiness of the people, a system of public education shall forever be encouraged. Mm-hmm. So number one, the federal government can't provide it, they can encourage it. And two, the purpose of education is the teaching of religion and morality. Education's purpose is to foster the common sense of morality amongst the people to the next generation, to create citizens capable of living in a free civil society. Adam said the Constitution was written for a religious and moral people. It's wholly inadequate to the government of any other. That's because freedom and morality cannot be extricated. They're inextricably linked. If you try to have freedom without morality, you will lose freedom. Mm-hmm. Because once people are just free to do whatever, I mean, just everyone does what's right in the sight of his own eyes. Mm-hmm. Human nature being what it is, the strong will oppress the weak. If everyone's just free to do whatever they want, if you have the freedom but lack the morality, you will inevitably lose the freedom. And that was the purpose of education.
Yes,
it wasn't to prepare people for college or to prepare them for a career. It was
give them a moral basis
to live in a free civil society. And without it, you will lose it.
And again, it was sort of a Christian self-government, because if individuals do the right thing, you don't have to have a police officer on every corner.
Exactly. Self-government as a country begins with self-government by the individual.
Well said. If
you cannot govern yourself, then you're exactly right. You won't be able to hire enough police. You won't be able to have a big enough military to keep the strong from oppressing the weak, the evil from oppressing the good, however you want to say it. And so, that's the whole purpose of education, is to instill in the next generation that common understanding of what is good, what is true, what is beautiful, and natural law and the rights that come from natural law, and the purpose of government being to protect those rights. And I think, in the last year and a half, you have seen on your TV play out in major cities across the country. What happens when you have freedom without morality? If you have the freedom to assemble, to protest, in air quotes, or to petition a government for redress of your grievances, but you lack the morality to conduct your protest in a way that doesn't destroy the private property of other people, eventually somebody's going to come in and say, well, you know what, we just can't allow protests anymore. Because every time we allow protests, these people burn down private property. They steal, they loot, they rob, or they attack a government building, or they do all of this other stuff. You will start to see people say, well, we need to maybe rethink this whole First Amendment thing.
Oh, I'm sure.
And then you lose that freedom.
And so, again, that's why we need to have education, need to think about those issues. Just before we run out of time, I've been talking about conspiracies and myths and everything. I wasn't going to talk about it, but a couple of days ago, New York Times' Maggie Haberman reported that Donald Trump has been telling people that he expects to be reinstated as president by August. And I thought, well,
I was having such a good day, Kirby.
Yeah. And then it turns out that Charles Cook, and you know who he is because we respect him very much, says, a lot of people just dismiss that, and a number of them stuck fingers in their ears and said, oh, it's just fake news. And he said, no, I've listened to and run into other people saying the same thing. And then just recently they had this conference where Sidney Powell was saying that she's convinced that Donald Trump is going to be in office in August. Michael Flynn implied that and also said maybe it's time to have a revolution. And now people are starting to say not only will Donald Trump be the president in August, but he will also be able to reinstate a few senators like David Perdue from Georgia and Martha McSally in Arizona. Can we set this one aside and say, what in the world?
Please set it aside. Why'd you have to read that? I was having a good day.
I just wanted to say that I was, it's kind of like the UFO thing I did a couple of weeks ago. I didn't think I'd ever write a commentary on UFOs, but when so many are talking about UFOs, okay, you got to get into it. When you're starting to see people document, and I don't know what has happened to the former president or to Sidney Powell or Michael Flynn or some of these other individuals, but this is just a sad commentary on where our culture is going. But you don't have to worry about whether or not there's going to be a re-inauguration in August. I think we can say that with certainty, can't we?
Yeah, I hope. Yeah.
It's just the craziest stuff. Well, just before we run out of time, let me come back on a positive note and recognize that you at First Liberty have really been winning these cases. But as I mentioned at the outset, this is, if you will, graduation season. And even though you've defended these two valedictorians in the state of Michigan, a number of listeners still have children and grandchildren that are going to go through graduation. So if there's some kind of threat for your religious liberty, they can call First Liberty, can't they?
Absolutely. Go to firstliberty.org. Right at the top of the page says Get Legal Help. Real simple form to tell us what's going on. And in this specific instance, if it relates to your right to mention your faith in your valedictory address, you really need to contact us before while there's time for us to fix it.
Yes.
You can't come to us after the graduation's over and say, I didn't get to give the speech I wanted. Well, there's not a whole lot we can do about that. So you need to come find us now. Firstliberty.org. Click that Get Legal Help tab.
And as I've said before, you lose your liberty when you don't exercise it. And so, again, these young girls in this case, but others that have stood up for their liberty have been able to establish a very positive precedent, not only for themselves, but for the future. Well, we're going to have a great weekend. I'm looking forward to it. And I hope that you will join us on Monday because we have some great interviews next week. I want to thank Andrew and Steve for the help behind the scenes. And we encourage you to go to the website, pointofview.net. We'll be back Monday.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @Point of View RTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, at Point of View RTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.